Hello, welcome to HackTech's Microsoft Prep Session. Our goal in this session is to help you win using Windows 8.1, Windows Phone, and Windows Azure. My name is Brett Statham. I'm a technical evangelist for Microsoft. You can find me on the web at brettstatham.com. In fact, the latest post has a copy of the slides that you're looking at here. You can also email me after this session at brett.statham@microsoft.com if you need a DreamSpark verification code or a BizSpark enrollment code. And I'll be at HackTech along with a bunch of my teammates. We'll be there for technical assistance as well as having a selection of demo devices that you can use to test your apps out on. So, as I said, our goal here is to help you win at HackTech. And we've got a couple of special challenges as well as special categories. If you develop a Windows 8 or Windows Phone app, you have the opportunity of above and beyond the regular HackTech prizes of winning $1,000 for the team as well as hardware. There's also a similar category for developing apps that use Windows Azure. Same $1,000 or additional hardware. And then starting this week, we've got some special challenges. And you should have learned about these from emails that went out to you from the HackTech team. But if you come up with an idea for an app that's either a social, travel, or game app, you can submit that idea on the Hacker League site, and then we'll do some judging on that. And then if you actually build the app that we select, then you're eligible for a $250 gift card. All right, so overview here to help you win. We're going to walk through a few different things. First, I'm going to tell you how to sign up for a number of programs that Microsoft has available. DreamSpark for students and BizSpark for startups. Then we'll show you how to get access to the tools that you'll need to actually do Windows 8, Windows Phone, and Windows Azure development. I'll talk through some of the different services that you might think about using through HackTech up in Azure, like virtual machines, websites, and mobile services. And then finally walk through a couple of demos of developing a Windows 8 app that uses Windows Azure, as well as a Windows Phone app that uses Windows Azure. So let's get started. First of all, thinking about signing up, Microsoft has some great services or programs specifically for students and startups. But before you can sign into those, you first need to go get a Microsoft account. Now, Microsoft account was previously known as a Live ID or a passport, and you'll use a Microsoft account to gain access to Microsoft services. That's also a great way to log into Windows 8, as well as to sync with your Windows Phone, store files up in SkyDrive, a whole bunch of other cool stuff. So in the Windows ecosystem, the Microsoft account rules. If you already have a Microsoft account, great. Just make sure you know its name and its password. If you don't have one, no problem. You can go to signup.live.com and go ahead and enroll for an account there. So I did mention that Microsoft has some different programs that help you get access to our software and some of our services. So first of all, as a student, and if you're attending HackTech, we're going to assume you're a student, there's a program called DreamSpark for students. And any student can sign up for this. You can just go to dreamspark.com. We do, however, require that you verify your student eligibility. And you're going to do that through either an email address from your school. Typically, those will end with a .edu address. Or if you're an international student, maybe an ISIC card number. If you have a problem with either of those, though, you can email me, and I can send you a verification code that'll help you get through that verification process. But the value of DreamSpark is that once you've signed up, you can get Visual Studio 2013 Ultimate. We've got Windows Server 2012 licenses and installs that you can download. Now, that's not Windows 8. You can do Windows 8 Dev on it, but it's not Windows 8 itself. It's Windows Server 2012. We also, however, give you free membership as a developer in the Windows and Windows Phone stores. So that's pretty cool. DreamSpark Premium is a different program that your school has to sign up for. And so to get into it, you'd have to work with your school DreamSpark account administrator to get registered. However, the benefit of that is that you also can now download the Windows 8.1 client software, as well as Visio and Project and all that kind of stuff. So that's pretty cool. Those two together, DreamSpark for students and DreamSpark Premium, give you a pretty full set of software and services. However, we have a third program specifically for startups called BizSpark. BizSpark is for companies that are thinking about selling software or apps. You can just go to the link on the screen there or just bizspark.com. But students who are thinking about making apps and selling them into the stores count. If you're thinking about selling an app, you're a startup. Really, the criteria is just that your business is less than 5 years old. you make less than $1 million. And we do require that when you enroll that you give us a URL for the website and an email for the business. But those could be really simple. You could just create a free Azure website or even a Facebook page or something like that, within a couple of minutes, as well as an email account, like a free Microsoft account for your business. But once you're enrolled in BizSpark, you get everything. You get all of our software, Windows 8.1, Windows Server, Office, Visual Studio 2013, free membership as developers in the stores. And for me, I think probably one of the most valuable things is right down here, and that's $150 a month of free Azure usage. That means you could have virtual machines running perpetually up in the cloud that are covered by that $150 a month credit. Databases, websites, mobile services, other things like that that you can use within there. And that's really, really cool. So let's walk through a demo of signing up for some of these different services. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my desktop here and pull open Windows Explorer. Now, I'm actually already signed in with a Live ID or a Microsoft account, so I'm going to go ahead and just pull browser up into private browsing, and that'll get rid of all my cookies and all that good stuff. So I mentioned if you need a Microsoft account, you can just go to signup.live.com, and in there, go ahead and fill out the information to create an account. Now, when you get to the username, you can use an existing email address like a Gmail account or Yahoo or whatever. However, you can also get a new one using one of our domains, outlook.com, hotmail.com, or live.com. I'm going to go ahead and make a outlook.com one. I'll just call it htdemo02 or something like that. And down here, I can create a password. If that name has already been used, it'll let you know. Looks like mine's available, so that's good. And I'm going to go ahead and put in a password here. Make sure I get the right one here. And confirm it. United States. I'm out in San Diego. I'll use 92108. And let's say I was born in January 1st of 1990. Just keep it pretty simple here. And I'm a male. So you also would probably want to make sure to enter in your phone number or something like that, as well as an alternate email so that they can contact you if there's any issues. And then lastly, they'll ask you to enter in one of these fun little captchas down here to verify that you're a human. I don't want any promo offers, and so I'll create my account. And as long as I entered my CAPTCHA information correctly, then boom, I should now have an account, and I ought to be able to just jump over to outlook.com. And I've got my inbox and all that good stuff. All right, pretty cool. So very easy to set up a Microsoft account. You can do that pretty darn quickly. Once you've signed up for a Microsoft account, then I did mention that as a student, you're going to want to go to dreamspark.com. And in Dreamspark, you're going to sign up first as a student. So I'll follow the link up here for students. And then as I scroll down, you'll see that I can create an account. So I'll go ahead and do that. And I'll call it HackTech Demo. And enter in a birth date. I'm going to be, again, January 1st of 1990. Oop, I'll let that reload. 1990. Looks good. And then down below, I'll pick a date, January 1st. Sounds good. And I've got my HackTech, I called it htdemo02 at outlook.com is my email. And fill in my country down here. I'm from the United States, but you can pick yours. And a password. So notice I'm actually creating, this is not the Microsoft account. This is a separate account for Dreamspark. But in this case, I am going to go ahead and sign up for the additional information and continue to verify. So I did mention that you do need to verify your eligibility as a student. And so this is where you would do that. You can get verified through your school, in which case you'd go ahead and enter in your school name. For example, I went to San Diego State University, and I could find them down here. And then you could continue, and they'll ask you to enter in your school email address, and then they'll send you a verification email, and you can follow the process through there. If you have an ISIC card, you can pull the number off your ISIC card and enter that in here. Or if you have a problem with either of those, again, you can send me an email and I can email you a verification code that you can just paste in there. If for any other reason you need help, there's other options, and we now have a manual verification request that you can go through to get that done. But once you've signed up, let me go back to just the DreamSpark site. Under students, there's now an option to download software. And inside there, I'll go ahead and go to the software catalog. It's from there that you can get your copies of Visual Studio. So you'll notice that we have Visual Studio Pro, etc. in there. We have different Express editions. There's TFS. So there's a number of other versions of software that you can download and install from there. As far as operating systems, we do have Windows Server 2008, or if you want to do Windows 8.1 Dev, you can download this Windows Server 2012 R2, and that's the same kernel as Windows 8.1. So you can actually do Windows 8.1 development on Server 2012 if you need to there. And then also some great training resources and things like that down here. Pluralsight, fantastic online video resources up there. So that's DreamSpark for students. Now I can also go back to the site, and you'll notice there was a third option for more software through your school. Now that's if your school has a DreamSpark premium account. So I could go ahead and again, I went to SDSU. And you'll see that, in fact, there's multiple accounts for my school. That's because different departments have signed up for accounts. So I'll pick the one that's the most appropriate for me, and then follow the link off to the web store. Now, if you have already registered, or you may want to look back through your emails and see if you already have information on getting into it. If not, once you get to your school's web store, you can follow the help link in the top right corner, scroll all the way to the bottom to contact us, and then request an account. Fill that out, and your school's account administrator should get that information. Give them all the details they need to get back in touch with you, and they can help you get registered for your school. Once you've done that, though, then you have the ability of, if I just go back home here, into the catalog, you'll notice that you can, in addition to Windows Server 2012, which you could get through DreamSpark for students, you can also get Windows 8.1. We've got Visio, Project, Access, some of the different Office packs that are available there, and some other software that you can download and install. So that's pretty cool. The last one that I mentioned was BizSpark. So I'll just go to bizspark.com here. And this is, again, different than DreamSpark. This is specifically for startups. But again, if you're thinking about selling apps, you are a startup. And so all I would do is come down here and go ahead and join. I want to make sure that I'm signed in with my Microsoft account, but I already am. So I'll go ahead and just sign in to join BizSpark. And sign in. My language is English. And then I'd complete this enrollment form. Should be pretty straightforward for you. The key part over here is to come up with a company name and a company URL. It could be that you're just coming up with this right now. You may not have formally started a company yet, but you are thinking about selling software as a service, software or app store. So in that case, you are a startup. So come up with a good company name. For the company URL, you could create a free Azure website. I'll show you how to do that in just a minute, or even a Facebook page, something like that for your business. And then a free Microsoft account or Gmail account or something like that as your company email, perfectly valid. Fill in the rest of the information. If you have any problems, you can, again, email me, and I can send you an enrollment code that'll help you speed up the verification process. But let me know if you need that, and I can help you out with that. Once you have signed up for BizSpark, then the way that you actually get the software for that is through a site that we have called MSDN, Microsoft Developer Network. And I need to sign out and come in as somebody who actually has credentials here. So let me go ahead and sign in. I'm going to come in as a different account because I didn't complete, sorry, wrong password. I didn't complete the BizSpark enrollment as that HTDemo02 account. But now that I'm signed in, I can go to my MSDN subscriptions and access benefits. And it's from here that I could go download software, but it's also here that I can get Visual Studio Online. Remember I mentioned that was our hosted TFS. which includes source control either in TFS or Git, as well as a whole bunch of other really cool stuff. This is where you would go to activate your free Windows Azure account. Here's the registration code to get you into the Windows Developer Store for free. Office 365, a whole bunch of other cool stuff that you get just as a member of that. Notice that this is all through my BizSpark account. So that's really awesome. And if I go to my subscriber downloads, this is where I could go to get Visual Studio, Windows, Office, Windows Server, a whole bunch of other really cool stuff downloaded right from here. Very awesome. Great. Well, now that you've signed up for the different programs, you can then go in and start look at getting the tools that you need. And again, remember I mentioned already that you can download Visual Studio 2013 through your DreamSpark or BizSpark memberships. But I do want to mention a few other things here. If you're coming in using a Mac or Linux workstation, no problem. You have a number of options if you want to do Windows 8.1 or Windows Phone development. First of all, on a Mac, you can install Windows 8.1 using Boot Camp or just on Linux and install it on another partition and dual boot between those two operating systems. I have the option, well, in fact on Linux as well, to install Windows 8.1 in a virtual machine using, say, VMware, VirtualBox, or Parallels on the Mac. And in fact, Parallels and VMware Fusion allow you to reuse your Boot Camp partition on a Mac so that you don't have to have multiple installs of Windows. Another great choice is to use a Windows Azure virtual machine and spin up a Windows Server 2012 R2 VM to actually do Windows 8 development. Now, you wouldn't be able to do Windows Phone dev inside a VM because the phone emulator is a virtual machine, and you can't do a VM in a VM. So another choice that you have if you aren't looking to do Windows 8 or Windows Phone dev, but for remember we have a Windows Azure prize category as well, and you can just directly consume Azure resources from your OS X, iOS, Android, really any platform can leverage services running up in Azure. So that's another choice that you have for you. And I'm not going to go into it here, but I will mention that there's a third-party company called Xamarin that has a cross-platform set of tools that lets you use C# and .NET to develop applications across Windows 8, Windows Phone, iOS, Android, and more. I will mention that there's a slide that I have back at the end of this deck in the resources that you can refer to for some ideas of working with other platforms. All right. I'm not going to dig into each one of these sites deeply, but I do want to make sure you know about these resources. For everything you need to know about building for Windows 8.1, you can go to dev.windows.com. We've got downloads, samples, documentation, a whole bunch of really cool stuff from there. Similarly, we have dev.windowsphone.com for all the resources you need around Windows Phone development. And you can go to windowsazure.com to get all the resources that you need for development around Windows Azure, including SDKs for .NET, Node, PHP, Java, Python, iOS, Android, a whole bunch of other cool stuff that you can download from the Azure site up there. Visual Studio 2013, however, is the development environment that you use on Windows to build applications. And as far as I'm concerned, it's hands down the best IDE out there. So if you're coming in from Eclipse or Xcode, I think you're in for a real treat working with Visual Studio. And in the Windows environment or the Microsoft stack, we use Visual Studio to develop all kinds of apps. Windows, phone, web, database, Azure, whatever. Now, I'm a C# guy, so that's the language I usually program in. But with Visual Studio, you can also choose VB.NET, C or C++, JavaScript, and then there's even third-party plugins for doing like IronPython and other ones out there as well. Now, Visual Studio ships a couple of different ways. The Express editions are free, but you need a different version for each target platform. So you'd have Express for Windows 8, Express for desktop, Express for Windows Phone, Express for web, and you have to switch between these different tools as you target those different platforms. The value of a cohesive Visual Studio environment, like you get with Visual Studio Pro or Visual Studio Ultimate, is that you can use a single tool to develop all of those different kinds of apps. Now, in fact, on the slide, I say you can get Visual Studio Ultimate through DreamSpark. You can get Pro through DreamSpark for students, or Ultimate through DreamSpark Premium through your school. Or again, if you sign up for BizSpark, and I strongly encourage you to, then you can get Ultimate and everything else through BizSpark. Once you do go into Visual Studio, then you've got a choice of the different kinds of projects that you want to work with. So you could create a project for Windows Store applications, and we've got a number of project templates. We've got Windows Phone. You can build for web. I actually, in this screenshot, have the Xamarin tools installed, and so you notice that it'll even let me build, Android and iOS applications. It's kind of cool. That's specific to Xamarin, though. You wouldn't normally expect to find that there. Once you've got your project created, you may need some additional libraries like the Windows Azure Mobile Services SDK or something like that. So in the Visual Studio, you can right-click on your project in the Solution Explorer and say Manage NuGet Packages, and then it's from there that you can search for additional libraries and SDKs to install into your project. I'll also mention that visualstudio.com is available to you. Visualstudio.com gives you a hosted source control and process management. The source control can be either in TFS's own storage, or it can be a Git repository if you prefer to use Git. You can sign up for that for free at visualstudio.com, and again, it's free for teams of up to 5. And then I've already shown you this, but remember, if you are a BizSpark member, where you'll go to get your software as well as all your other benefits is through MSDN, or the Microsoft Developer Network. So remember that resource. In this next section, we're going to take a look at Windows Azure. And I mentioned this earlier, but Azure is our cloud platform, and I think there's some extra useful services for hackathon participants, for example, at HackTech, that can really help you leverage the cloud to speed your projects along. But as I said, Azure is our cloud platform. There's a ton of services that you can use. We've got virtual machines, websites, mobile services, blob storage, table storage for a NoSQL database type thing. We have relational databases. And you can sign up for a free 30-day or $200 usage trial. The trial expires at either 30 days or when you've used $200 worth of resources. However, if you signed up for BizSpark, you get $150 a month of free usage through the life of your BizSpark account, which is 3 years. So that's really, really valuable. Extremely cool. And I said that again for HackTech, there's some things that I think would be specifically useful. To get into your Azure management, you can jump up to manage.windowsazure.com, sign in with the Microsoft account that's associated with your Azure subscription, and then from within there, you can create a bunch of different types of resources. Azure Virtual Machines, I think, might be useful to you this weekend. You can create persistent virtual machines in Azure. And by persistent, I mean that these aren't running on your laptop. They're running as virtual machines up in the cloud. So you can shut down your laptop, go home, and your VM is still running up in Azure. That's really cool. We support a variety of Windows versions as well as Linux distributions. And you could use these a ton of different ways. You could use these virtual machines as your actual development workstation. So if you're coming in on a Mac or a Linux box and you want to do Windows 8.1 Dev, rather than installing Windows 8.1 physically on your own laptop, you could go and install a Windows Server 2012 VM up in Azure, and actually Windows Server 2012 R2 for Windows 8.1 development. And you can do Windows 8.1 Dev in Server 2012 R2. You can't, however, do phone development. I mentioned that earlier, and that's because the phone emulator is itself a virtual environment, and you can't run the virtual environment in another virtual environment. But you can do Windows 8.1 Dev. You could build websites. You can host your own services, or it's just a regular Windows or Linux box. Install whatever you want to into it. So that's pretty cool. So let me actually jump over here, and I'll just demo this as we go rather than at the end. So I'll jump over to my browser. Try that again. There we go. And I'm going to go ahead. I'm in as my Brett demo account. That's fine. So I'm going to go HTTPS manage. Actually, before I do that, remember, if you're a BizSpark member, when you go into your account, it's from there that you would activate your Azure subscription. Now, I've already done that, so I don't need to do it here. But once you've got that, HTTPS manage.windowsazure.com brings you into the management portal. And I'll go ahead and sign in with my Brett demo account. And just loading up the management portal for me. And over on the left-hand side here, I can see websites, virtual machines, mobile services, a whole bunch of other types of things that I can create up in Azure. We're talking about virtual machines, and in fact, you'll see that I already have one virtual machine running in there. It's called Brett Demo VM, and so I could actually come in and manage that one here if I wanted to, or shut it down, restart it, connect to it remotely or whatever. But to create a new one, this is pretty easy. I'll just click on New. And probably the easiest way to create a virtual machine is from the gallery. And that's going to show you a whole bunch of different images that you can choose from. but I'll pick from gallery. And then in here, you'll notice we've got a ton of different categories, but here's all of them. We've got Windows Server 2012 R2. So if you want to do Windows 8.1 development, that's the base OS you'd want to start with. We also have 2012. You could do Windows 8, but not 8.1 development with Server 2012. You need R2 to do 8.1 development. But we've got Server 2008. We've got servers that already have product installed, like SQL Server into them, etc. Scroll down. We've got ones that have Visual Studio all ready to go. So that's kind of cool. Unfortunately, these are only good for 8.1 development, though, because they're on 2012, not 2012 R2. We've got Oracle pre-installed. We've got Linux distributions that you can pick from. This is all pretty awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and just pick this top one, Windows Server 2012 R2 development, because I want to be able to do 8.1 dev inside this. And go on to next. And you're actually going to set up a new virtual machine. So you got to give it a computer name. Let's call this my HT demo, 2012 or something like that. Or how about 2012 R2? HT demo 2012 R2. And then you're going to pick the size of the virtual machine, how many cores and how much memory. The bigger it is, the more it's going to cost against either your $200 trial amount or your $150 a month of Azure usage from BizSpark. And so the pricing is all documented up at windowsazure.com. But I'd say for most purposes, a medium is going to be perfectly fine. And then you can scale up or scale down later as you need to. And then since this is a new Windows computer, you also have to provision an administrative username and password. So I'll go ahead and just call it dev user. And these are going to be the credentials that you use to log into this virtual machine remotely. Now, to expose it out to the world, we create what's called a cloud service. And that cloud service will have a name. Typically, it's going to be the name of your virtual machine, .cloudapp.net. That all looks good. You get to choose what data center you want this virtual machine to run in. Notice we have data centers around the world, but I'm out in San Diego, so I'll pick West US. It needs to create a virtual hard drive that's going to go inside a storage account, and I'll just let it use an account that I already have. If you don't know, just let it automatically generate one. That's perfectly fine. And I'm not going to get into availability sets right now, so I'll just leave that and ignore. These are your firewall rules. It's going to open up ports to allow remote desktop and PowerShell, but if you're going to open up, say, a web service or something, you might want to also open up HTTP so that external connections can make it in over HTTP or whatever. But open up whatever ports you need, and again, you can come back and edit these later as well. I'll go ahead and hit OK, though, and at this point, it's actually out provisioning this virtual machine for me. That's really cool. It's actually installing a Windows server for me. Once it's done, it'll show up rather than saying starting, it'll say running. And then from there, you can go ahead and connect. Now, if you're on a Mac, you can install the Microsoft Remote Desktop application through the Microsoft Store. I'm on a Windows box, so it already knows how to use Remote Desktop. I'll just hit connect and open up this RDP file that came down and allow it to connect and enter in the credentials that you created when you provisioned the account or the virtual machine. And if you get security or certificate warnings, just go ahead and let it connect. And notice now I'm actually remoting in to this virtual machine. That is pretty darn awesome. I'll let it connect to the networks. And if you're going to be looking at doing Windows 8 development in here, there's a few things that you'll need to do to configure this. And I'll do a blog post on that separately, just so I don't take the time up with that here. But you can refer back to my blog, and likely I'll record another quick video just to show you how to configure this to do Windows 8.1 development. But at that point, I'm now remoted in, and I've got a development machine running up in Azure that I can start to work with. So that's pretty darn awesome. Let me go ahead and disconnect from that. And we'll jump back to the slides. So Azure websites are another really cool resource that we have that you can use up in Azure. You get 10 free websites per subscription, and those are perpetually free. So even if you sign up for a trial, any free websites that you create, you can continue to use up to 10 of them forever. That's cool. The free websites have a few restrictions on them. They can't have a custom domain name. They don't scale out. There's a few other restrictions. But otherwise, you can create every kind of website. You can do ASP.NET, PHP, Node.js. You can do blogs like WordPress or whatever. And again, we've got a gallery that you can use to create those sites. And then if you're just creating an empty site, you can use either FTP or TFS or Git, and even do continuous integration for deployment into those websites. Really cool stuff. So again, let's switch back over to my management portal, and I'll go to websites. And let's go ahead and create a new one again. So I'll just click on new. This time under compute, it's a website. And again, notice that we've got a gallery for web applications that we can choose from. There's a ton of them available. Let's say, for example, I wanted to create a WordPress blog. I could just come down to blogs and find WordPress and go for it. Or if I wanted to do, maybe Node.js development or something like that, I think that's under templates. I've got Express. So Express is a Node.js web framework that you can use. Let's go ahead and choose that. I'll just call it my BS Express, Brett Statham. Those are my initials. And notice that this is the host name of a fully qualified URL, right? So bsexpress.azurewebsites.net. So that'll actually be the address of this site that I'm creating. If you do want to do a custom domain on top of that, you can move from free up to either a standard or shared site. And again, I've got a blog post on that. You can look up my blog for that. Choose the region where you want the site to go. Looks good. I'll go ahead and hit OK. And this really does not take long at all. So behind the scenes, it's going out and provisioning that brand new site for me, pre-installing the framework, that Express framework for me, making it ready to go. And within just a few seconds, that site should be available. There it is. And I can now follow the URL off to it. And this isn't a very interesting site, but there it is. There's my Express website running up in Azure. And I really did just create that literally in a couple of minutes. So pretty cool. So the other type of service that's really useful to hackathon attendees is Azure mobile services. These give you a really easy way to create a backend for your mobile application. And we support your users logging into your app with like Microsoft accounts, Google, Facebook, Twitter. They can store data in an Azure SQL database that's up in Azure, but we give you a very simple RESTful API to consume that. You can create your own custom REST API endpoints, and you write your server-side code just in JavaScript running on Node.js. Because the APIs are all RESTful, that means you can just access them with HTTP. So really any client could talk to a mobile service. But to simplify your access, we give you pre-written SDKs for Windows 8, Windows Phone, iOS, Android, HTML5, and more out there. So this is really cool. So let's jump back over to the management portal. And I'll come down to mobile services. Now, actually, behind the scenes here, I just deleted a couple. You might have noticed that I had one or two in there before if you were looking at my counts, but now I'm down to 0. And I'm going to come in and create a new mobile service. And you're creating a mobile service with a URL. This is going to be the endpoint, the actual address that users will consume. And I'm just going to go call this htdemo, how about 02 again. Notice this is .azure-mobile.net. And that's the RESTful API that your applications are going to hit. But humans never really go here. There's not much here for humans. It's all just for back-end stuff. So you don't really care about having a pretty domain name on top of these guys. I did mention that Azure Mobile Services is going to keep its data in an Azure SQL database. So you can either create a new free 20 megabyte database or just create a regular one. I'll create a regular one. And I'm going to create these guys off in the West US region here again. The database gets named after your mobile service with _DB. And then I'm going to go create a new SQL server to put that on. And because it's a new server, you've got to provide the credentials, the administrative credentials. I'll just call it SQL admin and give it my password here. You'll notice there's a lot of places here where you're creating passwords. I recommend, at least through the hackathon, that you keep those consistent so that you're not having to remember a bunch of different passwords. But I'm going to go ahead and just hit the OK button. And now behind the scenes, it's provisioning for me this Node.js framework application. It's going to help go create the database, create the RESTful API endpoints that I can use to talk to the database, get this stuff all set up for me. And it usually doesn't take more than a minute at most to get this thing provisioned. So I'm going to go ahead and just wait this out. All right, And there it is. It's all ready to go. Now I could actually browse off to the site, but like I said, there's really nothing there for humans. So there's really nothing to see in the browser. Instead, I can just drill in to configure this. And you'll notice that I've got a number of things that I can do. I can set up data, API endpoints, I can schedule activities, do push notifications, authentication, a whole bunch of other good stuff. But over here on the little cloud with a lightning bolt, that link is called the Quick Start page. And it's in there that we've got a bunch of tutorials to help you get started for all these different platforms, right? Windows Store, Windows Phone, iOS, Android, HTML5, JavaScript, Xamarin, whatever. And so in the next demo, I'll come back here and actually show you using the starter apps for Windows Store and Windows Phone 8. But before we do that, let's jump back over here and, well, I've been demoing as I've gone, so I won't do a separate demo for that. But jump in and look at developing with Windows 8 and Windows Phone inside Visual Studio. First, let's take a look at how we would build apps for Windows 8.1. So first of all, Windows 8.1 is really just an evolution of Windows 8, which is an evolution of Windows 7. And that means that everything that you could run on Windows 7, you can still run on Windows 8.1, exactly like you did before. So that part hasn't changed. And that's because down at the bottom, we've got this Windows kernel that goes all the way back to the good old NT days. And traditionally, the way that we would have developed applications for Windows is to create what we would call a desktop app. And I might write that in C or C++ or maybe VB6 against the Win32 or COM APIs. I might also instead use C# or VB.NET against the .NET framework to create a desktop application. Another very popular way to run applications on Windows has been through the browser, right? Bing Maps, Office 365, those other browser-based applications are a great example of that. And those all continue to work exactly as they did before on Windows 8.1. You can use old apps, and you can go out and create new apps that work that way. But with Windows 8, Microsoft had this goal of being able to support ARM processors, right? So those lower power processors that run in consumer tablets, as well as the hardware that are in those tablets, like GPSs, accelerometers, touchscreens, etc. And we also wanted to be able to create a marketplace that developers could sell their apps through and that consumers could safely and reliably install those apps from around the world. And so to support that, Microsoft created a new class of applications called Windows Store apps, because we sell them through the store, and a new runtime to support those multiple hardware platforms, right? That runtime supports your application lifecycle, working with the devices like the touchscreens and accelerometers, drawing on the screen, communicating with each other and the system, a whole bunch of other stuff. And the way that we write applications to consume that Windows runtime, or just WinRT for short, is through a series of language projections. And those language projections expose the runtime APIs directly to me as a C# or VB.NET developer. And maybe I would write my user interface for my applications in XAML. I could also write applications using language projections for C and C++, as well as for JavaScript. So we actually allow web platform developers to use their HTML5 CSS skills to describe the user interface of their apps, and then JavaScript to implement the logic. And you can bundle those apps up and actually sell them in the store for consumers to install on their devices. That's really cool. So those are all the ways that you could create applications for Windows 8.1. Now, if you're thinking about creating a desktop app, you can. It's just that those apps will only run on Intel devices. You can't run desktop apps on an ARM processor. However, all the other apps run on full Intel devices, and then the store apps and browser apps run on ARM processors, right? So if you have an ARM processor, you can just do store apps and browser apps, not desktop apps. That also means that there's two different versions of the OS. Windows 8 runs on Intel devices and can run any kind of app, store apps, browser apps, desktop apps, whatever. Windows RT runs on ARM processors and can only run store apps and browser-based apps. So hopefully that clears that up. The other key thing here is that Windows 8 and Windows Phone continue to grow closer and closer together in terms of how we develop for them. And a big part of that is that we now have a shared kernel across those platforms. So the Windows kernel is the same in Windows 8 as it is on Windows Phone. We also have that Windows runtime that we talked about building Windows Store apps with. We have a similar library called the Windows Phone runtime, and those two continue to get closer and closer in parity to having the same functionality. And so that does mean that you can create Windows Phone apps very much the same way that you create Windows 8 apps with a few limitations. We have language projections for the Windows Phone runtime in C++ and C# and VB.NET, but not HTML5 JS, unfortunately. And there's also some things that make sense on the tablet that don't make sense on the phone and vice versa. So there's going to be some superset on both sides of those. So with that said, let's jump back over and look at how we can use that mobile service that we just created up in Azure and use it from a Windows 8 application as well as from a Windows Phone application. All right, so first let me jump out to my desktop here. And I'm going to go ahead and spin up Visual Studio. Now, I've already got a shortcut for it down here on my taskbar. If I didn't, I may have a tile for it up on my Dev Tools, or I could just go down to All Apps and find it in the list down there as well. Another real easy way to get it in Windows 8 is if you're at the start, just start typing Visual Studio, and it'll pop up in the search window for you. So a number of ways that you can start this. I'll go ahead and run Visual Studio 2013. Notice I'm using the Ultimate version. And from within there, inside Visual Studio, to start development, you go to File, New, Project. And from within there is where you choose the type of work it is that you want to do. So if you want to create a Windows 8 Store application, you pick that category. If you want to do Windows Phone, that's down here. We have web applications, etc. as well. Again, not to confuse you, notice that I do have Android and iOS, and that's because I've installed Xamarin's plugin for Visual Studio, which is a pay-for product. So that's why I have those choices in there. That is very cool, though, and something you might want to look into separately. But anyhow, I could come in here, create a Windows Store application. Sorry about that. And pick the project template to kickstart my development, right? So if you want to start with a blank app, we'll start you an app that already have a grid or some different structure in it to help you load your data in or whatever. But that's one way that you could get started. But remember, we'd gone up to Azure and created this mobile service. And I showed you on the quick start page that there were various get started tutorials for these different platforms. And notice that currently I have Windows Store selected, and the tutorial will help me either create a new app or add this mobile service into an existing app. And for the tutorial, I'm going to go ahead and just create a new app. And it walks me through the steps. It says, first, you ought to go get Visual Studio. Well, we've already got it, so I'm not going to mess with that. But it says that we're going to be storing some data up in Azure Mobile Services, and so we need a table to store that data in. And remember, when we created the mobile service, we got an Azure SQL database. I can actually see what's inside that database if I go to the data page. And it tells me that right now, I don't have any tables. So I could just add a table right now. But the sample, the tutorial application, needs a table specifically called to-do item. And that's because that's the table that the sample code is going to be looking for. So I could go make that table myself and just make sure to name it the same name, but I'll just click this button and it'll go create it for me. All right, so now the to-do item table has been created. That means that if I jump back up to the data page now, I should see this to-do item table. Again, to create your own table, really simple. In this case, we've already got the mobile service, so we don't want to make a new service. We just want to create a new table. So I'll hit the Create button down here. You can call it whatever you want, Brett's table, whatever. And then down here is the permissions. And notice that by default, client application has to know the application key in order to connect. You could require that users first authenticate with Microsoft, Facebook, Google, or Twitter accounts, or that, hey, these are public. Anybody can get to this table through the RESTful API. So that's really what we're defining here is what are the requirements for somebody to hit this table through the REST API. If you don't want anybody to hit it, you could say only scripts and server-side admins can have access to it. I'm going to leave the permissions at the default, though, and then if I were to hit OK, it would go out and provision that table for me. So you say, well, that's a table. What are the columns? Well, by default, there's some built-in columns in every table. So let me drill into to-do item. You'll see that there's no records in there. But if I switch over to columns, you'll see that I've got ID. So that's going to be a GUID. And then I've got some internal columns that are created for concurrency issues. So that the service can track when was the record created, when was it updated, a timestamp value for versioning. For the most part, you don't mess with these double underscore columns out here at all. These are all for internal use. But the ID uniquely identifies the row, and that's going to be a GUID value that gets provided for you. So that's pretty cool. The other columns, though, you could either add manually in here, or by default, if I switch over to my services configure page, you'll notice that there's this dynamic schema option, which is on by default. And what that says is that as we ship objects up to the RESTful API, it'll look at those objects and inspect the columns on them and say, oh, hey, the properties on those objects. It'll say, oh, hey, this object has this property. Let's say for a to-do item, my to-do item is going to need the text of what it is we need to do, and maybe a Boolean value as to whether or not it's complete, right? So I'd have a text property and a complete property or something. And so it will look at the target table and go, oh, hey, there's not a text column, and create a column called text on the fly that can take string values. And go, oh, there's not a complete column. So to make a complete column that's a Boolean that can store those true false values for me. And it'll just create them on the fly because this dynamic schema option is turned on. So that's really cool. Even though it's a relational SQL database, I get this sort of NoSQL RESTful, kind of flexible table idea coming out of that. So it's pretty cool. So I'm just going to leave it that way. And so back in here, I've got Visual Studio. We've created the table, and now they've given me a starter app that I can just download. So notice that because this is Windows 8, you can choose between C# or JavaScript. I'm going to do the C# one. But if you're a JS dev, feel free to download that version and play with it. I'll hit download, and it's going to give me a zip file. So I'm going to go ahead and save this out onto my C drive here somewhere. And I'll just make a new folder. How about htdemo? And I know this is Win8, so I'm going to go ahead and call the zip file Win8 so that it'll help me differentiate. And then I can open that folder up. Sorry, it popped up on my other screen. Sorry for my notifications popping up here. But anyhow, so here's the zip file I just downloaded. Whenever you download files off the net, you want to unblock them before you open them up in Visual Studio. That just removes any trust limitations on those. But I'll right-click on that then and say Extract All. And it's going to extract it into this htdemo02 Win8 folder for me. There it is. And notice that what I've got then, this is actually a Visual Studio solution file. So I can just double-click on that to open it up inside Visual Studio. And then I've got this window called the Solution Explorer window. If yours isn't showing up, you can get to it from the View menu and choose Solution Explorer. That'll make it pop up for you there. And inside there, then, I've got this project. And this is a Windows 8.1 project, and it's got some pre-existing files in it. But notice that there's some NuGet stuff. And I mentioned that NuGet is our package manager that allows you to install additional libraries and that kind of stuff. So because I've just opened this up, I may not have all those libraries on my physical machine yet. So the best thing to do is just go do a rebuild on the solution. So I'm just right-clicking on the solution here. I'm going to hit Rebuild. And it'll go make sure that we've pulled everything down. I can look at my output window. I can see that it's downloading all these different NuGet packages and all that good stuff. So that should be good. All right. And so now I can come over here and look at my project structure. So this is a Windows 8.1 app. So I have these set of files that represent the app itself. And in fact, the XAML for an app is pretty useless. The app itself doesn't have any visual appearance. I shouldn't say useless. There are things that we do in there, but I'm not going to worry about them right now. Most of the logic, though, is implemented in this app.xaml.cs. And if I scroll down here, you'll notice that this already has for me the mobile services client SDK installed, and the sample application has created this mobile service instance that I can get to through the app. So this is a static member that I can get to through the app class. And it's telling that mobile service that, hey, here's the endpoint. Remember when I created that mobile service, I called it htdemo02.azure-mobile.net. So there's the URL for it. And this other thing is that application key. If I jump back up there and look at my mobile service, let's go back to the dashboard page for it. See this Manage Keys link. And there's the application key. And again, because I downloaded this sample from the site, it already has the right application key. Notice that QWU64 already embedded in it. Let's jump back over here. Look at that. There's the QWU64, right? So it's got the right application key. And so basically this mobile service instance here then is going to be how I connect to all the other stuff through there. So if I were to just come in here and look at mobile service dot, Visual Studio's IntelliSense feature shows me all the things that I can do here. Notice I can get information about the current user. I can get references off to certain tables here. I can log users in asynchronously. So lots of cool stuff. Invoke API endpoints. Lots of cool stuff that I can do right there through that mobile service instance there. Pretty cool. All right. So then when the app runs, what it really pulls up is this main page. And so main page has its user interface described in the XAML document, implemented in the XAML.cs document. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on the XAML document, and it actually pulls open this designer for me. And so I can see sort of the layout of the application up above. Don't worry about these yiggles. Those are from some user controls that the sample app uses, and sometimes the designer doesn't show them right. But the basic idea here is that you're going to type in something you want to do. So I've got this text box called text input, and you type that in, and then you click on the save button to save that. And that's going to fire off this button save click event. When it does, that's going to go upload your new to-do item into the cloud and then update this list over here that shows you the to-do item and displays a checkbox that you can use to mark it as complete. And then the refresh button can be used to requery the data up out of the cloud. So it's a pretty simple little UI. If I jump back and look at the main page.xaml code, up at the very top, we've described a little class called to-do item. And remember, our table had an ID column, but then these other ones, and you must have that, by the way, to sync up with that. Notice we don't have properties for the underscore, double underscore created at, updated at, and version columns. But we add in all the additional properties that we want to store. So I've got the text for what is it we want to do. I've got a complete property for marking the thing as complete. And these guys are all going to get serialized out as JSON objects. So these are the names of the JSON properties that it's going to create. And then down below inside my main page class, I've got this to-do table that simply goes to that app, uses that mobile service instance that we saw earlier and says, hey, go get me a reference to that table called to-do item. And that's the table that we created earlier up in the browser. And so it's through that to-do table that we're going to go do things like creating a new to-do item and then just inserting it asynchronously up through there. So the sample code for this is all described in the tutorials. I don't want to dig too much deeper just in the interest of time. So let me go ahead and just debug this. I'm going to go ahead and run it. This is going to run on the local machine, that box with the X in it, the default Windows splash screen. And here's the UI for this sample application. And I'm going to type in the to-do item, finish demo with Windows 8.1, and I'll hit save. And notice it's already popped up over here on the other side. That lets me know that it's already done the insert into the cloud, and it's showing it to me down here on the client side. To close my Windows 8 app, I'm going to move my mouse up to the top. Notice it turns into a hand, and I'll just drag that down to the bottom. And if I hold it there until the tile flips, then it actually shuts the app down. And then back over here in Visual Studio, it'll eventually time out, and Visual Studio will stop. If you don't want to wait for it, you can just hit the stop debugging button up there. So let's jump back over to the browser and go back to that data page. There's my to-do item table, and we should see now that there is a new record in there. There it is, finished demo with Windows 8.1. Cool, so that made it up there. So that's pretty cool. Hopefully that gives you some basic idea of how it is that you could create a Windows 8 app to work with a mobile service on the back end. For more detailed tutorials, the Get Started just got you started. Notice there's Learn More, talk about how to add authentication, how to do push notifications, a whole bunch of other tutorials available for you to get started, and not just for Windows 8, but for Windows Phone, iOS, Android, etc. on down the line. Now, to show you how really cool this is, let's switch over and do Windows Phone. And I'm going to go ahead and download the sample app for Windows Phone. This is for the same to-do item stuff. And I'll just download that. And I'll call it Phone 8. Save that. Open the folder up. Unblock it. And extract it. And notice that this is another Visual Studio solution. I'm going to go ahead and open it up. And remember I said that Windows 8 and Windows Phone development are very similar. In fact, right here, I've got the same app.xaml with the same mobile service guy being created for me in there. So that's all there. And I've got a main page in the main page.xaml CS. These red squiggles are letting me know that it doesn't know what the mobile service client is yet. And that's because I need to go do the rebuild and let it pull down all those NuGet packages for me. All right, so there they all are. Should be good. And notice now my red squiggles have all gone away, so that's good. And for the UI, similar idea on the phone. I've got a text box to type something into, a save button, and then a list that will show the things in, and a refresh button that we can use to requery it. So it's the same UI stuff that we had in Windows 8, just laid out a little bit different because I need a different UI for my phone. In this case, when I run it, it's going to run in the Windows Phone emulator on the device. So I'll spin that up. And remember, I've already typed in a to-do item over in the Windows 8 application. So if this is really working, when this Windows Phone app starts up, it should go get the data from the cloud and show me the existing to-do items. And there they are. And so now I can click in here and do another one. I'll just type in, how about done or something. That done's bad because it's, how about cool? There we go. And I'll hit save, and that's actually going to persist it up there. So now I have 2 entries in there. And again, we ought to be able to go back to the table in the browser and see that I now have 2 records inside that table. Pretty awesome. All right. So hopefully with that, you see that we've got a pretty easy way to work with Windows Phone, Windows 8, and use Windows Azure services on the back end. So I just want to wrap this up with a few extra pieces of information. First of all, I've got this slide here. Again, if you download the slides, you'll have this available to you as a reference, just for some different ways that you could think about setting up your workstation to do development with Windows 8, Windows Phone, and or Azure out there. So if you're coming in and you already have Windows 8, there's some information on how to get started with that. If you have Windows 7, some options that you have for either upgrading or also installing Windows 8. If you're coming in with OS X on a Mac, some options that you have for getting into Windows 8 there. And then also a reminder that you could just use a Windows Azure VM. To do Windows 8.1 development, you can create a Windows Server 2012 R2 VM up in Azure, and then get it set up for doing Windows 8 development. And again, I mentioned I'll have a separate blog post and article or video on how to do that, as well as just with some useful links in there. So some go-dos, make sure that you sign up at dreamspark.com as a student. Also check to see if your school has a DreamSpark Premium account and get registered for that. Strongly encourage you to think about signing up for BizSpark as a startup. Again, this is really, you don't have to have any meat in the game for this other than setting up a very simple free, maybe an Azure website or a Facebook page that represents your business and creating a free email account for it, and get signed up for that. If you sign up for BizSpark, you'll also get a free Azure benefit. If not, you can sign up for a free trial. But in there, remember, you can create an Azure VM, Azure Development Workstation, if you need it. But regardless, to do Windows 8 and Windows Phone dev, you're going to want Visual Studio Ultimate. And then go get out, build a Windows 8, Windows Phone app, and win for that. Or maybe use a Windows Azure website or an Azure mobile service. And again, remember, we've got a special category specifically for Azure as well. So a category for Windows 8 or Windows Phone, and a separate category for Windows Azure. This page here just has a ton of different resources, links off to some of the sites that I've talked about, as well as to some different training resources that you can follow. Again, I'm not going to read through each one of these. If you download the slides, you'll have all these links available to you out there. And with that, hopefully this was useful to you. I hope you all have fun at HackTech, and good luck.